Welcome to our podcast. This is Friends on Fire.
I'm Mike. I'm a lifelong devotee of financial independence. I even wrote a book about it.
And I'm Maggie, a newer convert, but just as passionate, especially on the intersection of minimalism and financial independence.
We're one and the same.
We are two like-minded friends who believe that talking about money with your friends and family opens the door to financial well-being.
The Friends on Fire podcast is about dispelling myths, building financial acumen, and sharing your financial independence journey with the people you care about.
This is Friends on Fire. Hey, Maggie.
Hey, Mike. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. This is our first show of 2021, and we have a doozy for everybody.
Oh, geez. I literally have been waiting for this show since we started this podcast. I've been on you about this particular guest and getting them on.
Yeah, so we have discussed on the show many times how I've been on a fire journey since I was a little kid, and my parents retired very early. And you've been bugging me since the beginning of the show to get my dad on. And it's not that I didn't want him on. We just had a lot of other material to cover.
But this is like the most important material.
You're right.
We wouldn't
it should have been moved up
for him.
Yes, you're right.
And I didn't know that he had a friend on fire, that he had someone that was on this journey with him along the way too. So we also have his friend Mark on. So let's introduce them.
We are very happy to bring on the show my dad, Jack O'Leary, and his longtime friend, Mark Sullivan. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mark, you can say hi too.
Oh, hi. Well, thanks for inviting us.
Yeah.
Well, I think you guys invited yourselves, which is a good segue into the letter I received from my dad.
This letter is awesome.
Yeah, so we're gonna read part of this letter that I received surprisingly in my inbox, and I think we'll kind of preview the personalities of the guys we're going to be talking to today. So the letter reads, "Dear Maggie and Mike, Mark and I want to congratulate you and Maggie on Friends on Fire." And he put it in quotations. I'm not sure what that, Friends on Fire. "It's a great achievement with entertaining educational messages about wealth. Mark Sullivan and I are contacting you about your fine efforts and suggesting we both be guest interviewees." And at this point, I'm not sure that they don't know that we don't make any money in this podcast, but we'll get to that.
All right.
"We talked about you two and think we have powerful messages for your audience that would be a positive addition to your show. We also think we have some claim to being an earlier generation of Friends on Fire. You may recall at each Thanksgiving while we lived in St. Louis, we met with the Sullivan family, but it was also Mark's and my wealth management review where we helped each other in our planning our futures. We discussed how to, and eventually we did make all the money we needed to retire early, as you know. We are still doing our meetings now, but mostly by phone, as we are lifelong devotees of the Friends on Fire strategy. Both of us would like to deliver our unique messages that we believe are the highest level tools we use to achieve wealth and fulfill our most meaningful life goals well. If you are not impressed with the interview content, we will, of course, waive the speaker fees and royalties. Regards, Dad, CC Mark Sullivan."
I love the formality of this letter. The fact that he formally let us know he CC'd Mark Sullivan, that they're willing to waive their speaker fees and royalties. Just to be clear, gentlemen, I will be sending you Friends on Fire stickers, including our hologram, which is how we pay our speakers. So you're going to get the same speaker fee that everybody gets.
You get a t-shirt?
We don't really have t-shirts, but Mike's wife can make you a custom shirt, which are the only shirts that exist, or the two that she's made.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool.
How about Michigan shirts? You must have a bunch of Michigan.
Yeah, I could get you a Michigan shirt for sure.
Yeah, we have a ton of Michigan stuff. Don't worry, Mark. We will hook you up with some good Friends on Fire swag. So obviously, kids learn most of this stuff from their parents. And, when I wrote the finance book last year, I recognized that most of that stuff I had learned from you, Dad, over the course of my life. But what I didn't realize was that I had also sort of plagiarized the entire Friends on Fire premise. And it wasn't until you wrote me that letter that I realized that you two had been doing this for decades and we had just somehow capitalized on it with a podcast.
You guys are the OGs. Do you know the term OGs?
No.
Original guys?
Original guys. I think there's a lot of different versions of what OG stands for, but yeah, you're the original guys.
You guys are the originals.
So yeah, we would love to have you guys kind of start at the beginning and tell us about, when you retired and just, a bit about kind of where you came from and your upbringing and how you guys got to the point that you are at today.
I wanted to talk about Mark and I briefly. We both worked together at General Dynamics Planning, and I thought we were hot shots and created the name the Pros from Dover, which we used to go up and visit divisions and refer to ourselves as the Pros from Dover as a joke. This was out of the MASH movie, if you recall, the two surgeons running off to Japan. But we collaborated on our personal finances and goals all the time, and today we think we look like Friends on Fire. And it's been going on now for 35 years. And after retirement, we kept calling 30 times a year or so, more than an hour at a time or something, to go over everything from family health to national economics to whatever our kids are doing wrong. And we helped each other both get fairly rich. And today, we think we are an early version of Friends on Fire, but I think also we possibly are the first Grandads on Fire. and another better term that I like more is maybe we're the baby boomers on fire, or the boomers on fire is my favorite.
I like how you have all these names ready to roll, like a podcast is coming or something.
I'm ready to go into business here.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like Grandads on Fire. That was my favorite of all of the ones you just threw out.
Okay. Well, I anticipated, I was trying to figure out if baby boomers was taken, and I went online and I got a hit for a baby boomers on fire. And it was an article that came out as anticipating the effect of aging baby boomers on fire. And it reads, the purpose of this research was to identify the current and potential impact of aging baby boomers generation to the Coral Gables Fire Department. So that's the only record I can find of the boomers or baby boomers on fire. So I think that was one that I was going to latch onto.
I like it. Yeah. There's definitely, I've noticed as I'm looking for different names and social media and other things, there's a lot of people who, yes, are using the term on fire literally versus our financial independence use of the term fire. So you guys, you met at work, you continued this friendship. What are the sorts of things let me take that back. How did you guys both discover that you had this shared interest and passion in improving your finances and just that journey that you ended up on together?
I'm going to take this, Jack.
Okay.
We worked in corporate headquarters of General Dynamics together. Jack actually hired me and brought me in to St. Louis from Boston. And we had, the reason I was hired was that really Jack and I had the same skill set. We're able to synthesize complicated financial statements into common sense and understanding and projection of trends and where they're going. So we had pretty much the same skill set, and we were out working together. And I say that meaning that they would send the two of us off to one of the divisions to try and understand why there was a particular problem. And it might be a project, or it might actually be one of the business units itself. So we spent a lot of time on the road together, and not only doing analysis work, but doing presentations in motel rooms at 2:00 in the morning. And we found, I guess, just through discussions, our common interest in saving enough money so that we could jump out whenever really we wanted to. And I think it started with me in terms of understanding Jack's interest when in his office I walked in one day and he's got this huge drawing of the Standard & Poor's 500 up on his wall. And he's doing regression analysis on it. And I thought to myself, boy, this guy's pretty interesting. He's got an interesting way of thinking about this. So that started us talking about money and stocks, and eventually led into very comprehensive discussions regarding where our futures were going financially. And so I think we provided a lot of help to each other over the years. I don't know if that was an accurate assessment, Jack.
That sounded pretty good to me. Pros
And
and
that sounds pretty similar to me and Maggie.
Yeah, except I'm not good at synthesizing complicated financial everything Mark just said.
I think I might add that, while we were working together, we became really good friends. And, I think we had the same values. Our kids were the same age. We both were fact-based thinkers and strong-minded spouses. We were bound to be friends. And I think that the idea that we were both there to make money and had our own aspirations in life was irresistible to not make each other partners in thinking things through.
Yeah, I love that. Just even the term, partners and thinking things through, because one of the things that we talk about a lot and was kind of the premise for what had us, the idea to start the show, was how much benefit Mike and I, well, at least I had a lot of benefit from talking to Mike. I'm not sure if he had as much benefit from talking to me, other than feeling good about himself. But I think we saw there's so much benefit when you have these conversations about money, yet there's so many people that don't talk about money. They don't even talk about with their own family, let alone other people that are outside of their family. And so we definitely have also seen the benefit in how you can get better by, having an accountability partner, a friend, doing it with your spouse, with, a number of different people. So I love the benefit that you guys saw through that.
So we definitely want to come back to the discussions around money and how you guys made the decision to stop working. But let's talk a little bit about your individual upbringings and childhoods. Maybe Dad, we'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're from and what your upbringing was like?
Sure. My family lived in Grosse Pointe. My father was an automotive executive, and my parents were Depression kids, and which left them with a lifelong impression of never wasting money, and they passed that on to their kids directly. We used to have to work for everything, and it was benevolent, but we were working. And I remember we had a gardener that was running around in a house my father built. It was a pretty fantastic house, but he fired the gardener immediately and told me and my brother that we were the gardeners. And I was out there working there, and he paid me some money, and that's where I made my money to get into middle school and grades and high school. But I was the youngest of five, and I think being the youngest is a unique position to be in. You learn a lot of stuff real fast by getting beat up by your older brothers and sisters, psychologically and physically, and you get kind of a very independent thinker attitude. By eventually, when you realize it's combat, at least it was in my family. But I felt I was a very energetic problem solver and kind of thought independently, and that was true about money too. I was always trying to make money. Mark and I were talking on the phone yesterday about making money together, and it turned out we were doing the same thing. I was shoveling walks and paper route and doing high school work and stuff like that, just like he was. And I think people who, when you get a good attitude from money by your parents, and you get some people that inspire you to do some different things, you're on your way.
I was also the youngest, though only of one other. So I think it's definitely a very different dynamic when you're the youngest of, five. But I love how you talked about just, the I don't even know if scrappiness is the right word, but like the work ethic that, that creates. Did your parents talk about money a lot? Like, did you know what their financial status was? And
never,
okay.
Never. Mother was very secretive about it, and my mother didn't care about it. And but I mean, the general rules about money we knew, but I knew nothing about their finances personally, other than that they had a big house. I knew my father was well-to-do, and he lived well within his means, even though he lived very well. But we never talked about it. I think it was probably something about the 50s, private stuff,
I think there's still a lot of people that do not talk about money now with their kids, but though I think you're right that generationally it was probably even less appropriate to talk with your kids about money back then. So Mark, switching over to you, tell us a bit about kind of, your childhood and how you were raised.
Well, it's similar to Jack's, I guess. I was one of 5 boys. And unlike Jack, he grew up in a house that had about 9,000 square feet. Our house, 1,525 square feet with 7 people in it. And we lived in a town called Needham, which is outside of Boston, but it's an upscale town. And so we never wanted for anything, but we always worked. I always worked. I put myself through college, did all the jobs. Jack and I were struck by how many of the jobs we had done in our youth, I guess you could say. So we have similar backgrounds in that respect. We grew up in an environment where, as Jack indicated, parents out of the Depression, so it was a frugal, not cheap, but frugal upbringing, where saving money was important, earning money was important, working was important. There was no such thing as lounging around and taking it easy. And so I think that once you grow up like that, then you're really, your entire life is based around that type of a work ethic and that type of a value system. So that was pretty much the same as Jack, I guess, slightly different upbringing in the sense of socioeconomic, but pretty much the same values.
Can I jump in with a different thought here?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Mark's talking about values, and that's what I recognized in him too. But I remembered when I was 28 years old, I started to get interested in a lot of different self-improvement stuff. And I read a book about retiring early that I gave to Michael 2 decades later. But I also got a Franklin planner, and the Franklin planners used to have, the first thing you did was to try to write down what your values were. And it was they kind of coached you through it. It was a little book that you had to do. And you had to list your values, and it was supposed to be the most important one first and the least important one last. And I thought it was a spectacular exercise, but it also became a document that kind of guided me through a lot of my decisions in my life. And I think it's a tool that most people are unfamiliar with, but everybody, I think, talks about their values, but I don't know that they got them in the right order, or they might even be kidding themselves about some of the things they really value. Like vanity is always a strange one,
Yeah.
creeps in and stuff like that. But I thought that getting to the idea of him and I having the same values was a real tool and a friendship.
I totally agree with you. And I love the word values, and we talk about it a lot. And I do think it is so important. And it's one of the things that, being really clear on what's important to you, and sometimes questioning what's important to you, like taking a look at what I think Mike and I are both really clear on what's important to us. And it's what's made this journey enjoyable and easy for us. But you see other people, and I see people that I know well, or people from afar that I know are living beyond their means and are in debt and, have a fancy house and a fancy car, but they can't necessarily afford it. And you do often think like, are they really in tune with what matters to them and their values? And so I think that is such an important point. And one of the things that, again, to me makes, for anyone who looks at some of the ways that Mike and I live, and that I think you guys lived also, and think that we're suffering in some way, right? And realize, like, to me, like we joke about Mike's car all the time, his 2003 Ford Explorer, and say, it's not suffering. Like, he wears it as a badge of honor. It gets him where he needs to go. And he saves a ton of money from it. And he doesn't get value from having a fancy car. And I think that is one of many examples of kind of the idea that we're not suffering. We are living in alignment with our values.
Well, he gets that from his father. His father used to drive around in these junkers, and when they died, he would just take the plates off, leave it on the side of the road, and walk away.
Yeah. Well, I insisted on driving until the cars actually physically died, and that's when I'd give them up. That's for sure.
You definitely passed that trait along to your son. So well done.
Yeah.
One quick question. What was the book that you gave Mike that you said you read when you were younger that inspired the book about
it was How to Retire, and I think it was at 40, and the subtitle was Cashing In on the American Dream. And it's a funny story about the guy. I read it when I was 28 years old, and 15 years later, I decided to see how he was doing. His plan was that he said you only have to make $500,000 and you go to Panama and you buy a condo for $100,000 and then you live on CDs was his plan, which wasn't too elegant. And I remember looking him up 15 years later, and he had withdrawn from Panama, come back to Austin, and was working a typical job that he didn't really. It was an unsuccessful retirement.
That's interesting. I just looked up the book. It is still for sale on Amazon. Well, actually, it's not exactly. You can get some used versions. They're very expensive. If you still have a copy of that book, it looks like it might be worth a lot. It's called Cashing In on the American Dream, How to Retire at 35. It was written in 1988, and it looks from the front of the cover, you can tell it was written in 1988.
Yeah. I'd be cautious about, if you're serious about retiring, I'd be cautious about reading it.
No, like, I was more just curious what it was, but we will note that we are not recommending anyone purchase that book.
Yeah.
And I love that you kept up with what that guy was doing.
Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah, it was a good book. It was definitely an oversimplification of the entire process.
Well, the CDs are now paying zero, for instance, is one of the flaws,
Maggie, another book that I found very profound in my thinking was a book called Rich Man, Poor Man. And it talked about lifestyle, and it talked about the guy next door and how he drives around in a fancy car, probably a big Subaru.
I love it, Mark. Keep going.
And he belongs to the country club, and everybody's very jealous of him because he looks so successful. But in fact, he doesn't have a nickel to his name, that it's all on debt, and he's leasing his car. I think another version of the same book or the same thinking is The Millionaire Next Door. It really talks about how your lifestyle, and I know Mike has talked about this in the podcasts, how your lifestyle is a big driver on how much money you eventually have and how soon you can punch out and go do what you want. If you belong to the country club and you do all those types of things and try and keep up with the Joneses, then you're doomed. You're going to be in the saddle till you're probably 70 years old.
We spend a lot of time talking about keeping up with the Joneses, lifestyle inflation. And I think you're right. I think that connects to the whole values piece, right? If you're clear on your values and what really matters and what makes you happy, right? And like, to me, living within my means isn't just about being able to retire early. It's a recognition of what actually makes me happy. Like I am into, and I love the Subaru comment/dig. The A, because you listen to the show clearly, B, because I drive a Subaru. And it's, but it is an example of, I feel like for 30 seconds, I'm going to justify my Subaru, because in your story, Mark, that person's in debt. In my story, I paid cash for that Subaru because I live very below my means, but that's not the point. But I do think, the idea of living within your means and in alignment with really understanding what matters to you and what makes you happy, and being clear on what your values are, and then aligning how you spend your money to what those values are is incredibly important. And it's clearly what catapulted you guys on your journey, and even just, in your friendship over the years.
I think one of the things that young people and even middle-aged people today just never realized or connected with was that really accumulating money is buying yourself options for later in your life. And if you don't have any, you don't have any options later in your life. And the more you accumulate, the better you can do all kinds of things. You can deal with emergencies with your kids that you didn't anticipate, or help them fund their lives and things like that. But it's all about, I think, my philosophy is what was always that I was trying to accumulate a big nest egg because I wanted to have all these options when I left work. And I think if everybody thinks about it as an option, I think they'd have a lot of healthier situation.
Yeah, I love the term option. We talk about freedom a lot too, and just that feeling of freedom, of knowing that you can go do whatever you want whenever you want and not feel stressed about money. It's an amazing feeling. Like we always joke, money can't buy happiness, but it can, because if you accumulate enough money, it can give you that feeling of options and freedom that is an amazing feeling.
So shifting gears a little bit, when you guys started meeting and discussing your personal finances, how did that initially start? What were those meetings like, and how did they evolve over time?
So I don't actually know that I remember how they started. Maybe Mark does, but I suspect that it was you go off on you're in Hutchinson, Kansas, having dinner, and you start talking about something. That was a place where Mark and I had a funny business experience, but we were there for months or weeks going over trying to sell some division. But I think it was more probably just kind of casual, but then got formalized as we realized it would make us money. But what do you think, Mark? Do you remember it?
Well, I agree with you in terms of just talking about it generally, but I think it was would have been in the early 90s or the late 80s that we actually started meeting. I don't know what you call it formally, but we'd be down in my basement or in yours and going over our individual finances and talking about retiring early and what it would take to do that. But I think we also, one of the things that we talked about in these kind of meetings is it wasn't just money. It was also about the lifestyle and what was important to us and how it was affecting our children and how they were doing. So it was a broad ranging kind of review. And as time went on, it became a January 1st, it became a New Year's financial review of the two families. So it became a bit of a tradition over time.
Well, I think we used to have dinners, I think every New Year's or in a Thanksgiving. We used to always get together, right?
We did. And we hit it at some point, it reached the point where our families were having Thanksgiving together. Do you remember that, Michael?
Yeah, I do. Those were always great fun.
So, Mark, how many kids do you have?
I've got 3 children.
Okay. So, Mike, you grew up knowing his kids and.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we knew them very well.
All of our kids were at every wedding of all of Mark's kids and vice versa.
I like it. I was going to say it's like Cousins on Fire, you know?
Cousins. Yeah, I like that.
Okay. So you guys, let's kind of shift gears to tell me about how you got to the point of your decision to stop working. Like, how old were you? Did you consult with each other? Like, what did that transition look like for each of you? I think it was different.
Do you want me to go first, Mark?
Sure.
Okay. I go back to this period of reading the book about retiring early and the values thing with Franklin, but mostly the values things with Franklin. I always kind of was on a different track because I then go out and make all the money you could and be a business guy forever, because I had all these other goals that I had identified as being important in my life. And I was thinking that way when I was a young guy and working at the Ford Motor Company, and eventually ended up at General Dynamics and thought the same way. And I think as time went by, I got kind of anxious to get going on what were some of my personal goals. And I actually sculpted a plan, which was going to be that I was going to stay working on projects and not on processes. Processes are, I got a number of job offers at the company to be a controller of this or something, some of these smaller groups we had. And I turned them all down. I didn't want a job where I really couldn't I had to be there all the time. You know, if you're running an accounting department or if you're part of closing the books, you don't go anywhere. You got to be there. So, but projects are different. They start and stop, and you can schedule them and all kinds of things. And the company really liked me. I was doing some big work for them and good work for them that resulted in some big decisions that they made, and they recognized me for it and treated me very well for it. And I decided to see how far I could push it. And when I was about 33, if I could start taking summers off to travel with my kids, and I wouldn't take any pay, of course, and I would agree that if something came up they wanted me to work on, I'd cancel the trip. And surprisingly, they said fine. And I started traveling every summer with my kids and dragging Michael and Jesse all over the world. And it was a great thing for us. And I just kept doing it. And I ended up coming to the conclusion this was the best job I could have ever had for what I wanted to do with my life. And I concluded that that the smart thing to do would be to keep making money as long as I could have an enjoyable lifestyle like this. And then if it ever wasn't fun anymore, that I'd retire. And the company ended up deciding to move to Washington. And I didn't want to go to Washington. My kids were still in high school. I didn't want to disrupt the family and all of that. And I thought I had a lot of money and by then. And I think I got a letter from the CEO about it that we'd like you to come to Washington. I think everybody probably did, but I'm sure I'm the only guy that wrote him back. And I told him why I enjoyed working for the company, and I thought I did a good job. And his letter signaled that to me. But I think I'd like to stay and do more things with my family and not disrupt them. And so I'm just declining the offer, but thank you. And I got another letter from the CEO, and I'm sure I'm the only guy who got a letter from him back. He was telling me that he thought, geez, that's a really good idea and good, more power to you. And this was Bill Anders, the astronaut. So he was a pretty impressive guy. I got the letter in a little poster somewhere I used to hang it up in the house, but I don't have a house anymore. So it's in storage.
I love that the CEO wrote you back a letter admiring your life choices, right? That he saw the benefit and the appeal of the path you were on. And it's like the opposite of keeping up with the Joneses and lifestyle inflation, right? It's people recognizing like they have all this wealth and fame and everything else, but they look at someone like you who's, making a choice to spend more time with their family. They think actually like that's going to drive more happiness than any of the stuff I have.
Well, you need to be a particular personality to do it. I mean, you still got to go out and match your values. And a lot of people don't have those values. Even if they have a family, it may not be spending a lot of time with their family. Unfortunately, that's the case sometimes.
So let's shift to you, Mark. Tell us a bit about your story and how you ended up retiring early.
Well, I think that when we moved to St. Louis, my wife Linda and we always wanted to get back to New England because it's where our extended families were, and we grew up at the beach, so it was important to us. And but by the way, as we talk about money and values, I think it's important that that you marry an individual who has the same values that you do. And because it is a life journey that you're involved in. And I think Jack would agree that we were quite fortunate in our choices. And I would go further and say that we were lucky that we both married women who were smarter than we were. So that had the same values. And Michael, I know that you've done the same. So it's really an important element of the whole journey that you are in sync with your partner in life, and in my case, my wife. And so anyway, we wanted to get back to New England, and we love St. Louis, but we wanted to eventually get back. So for me, that was at the age of 55. That's when my pension would kick in, and that's when I figured I would have enough money to be able to do it. Plus, our families, our mothers, both Linda's mother and mine, were both still alive, and our fathers had passed away a few years back. So we had been away from the family for so long that it was important for both of us to get back and spend time with our mothers and our brothers and sisters. And it was really a great gift, I think she would agree, to be able to spend time with the mothers. And we spent a lot of time, I would guess about from our age, about 55 to 65, before the two of them eventually passed away. So there are people have different reasons for their journey and why they want to punch out. I knew I didn't want to work past 55. That it was just, when you are involved in a large bureaucracy and you work your way up, the stress levels can get pretty high as you get higher in the organization, and it becomes all consuming. And the electronic generation, I guess, the iPads, all that kind of stuff was just coming into vogue when we were doing it. Jack and I, we had Blackberries and pagers and things of that nature. So you could see that as the technology improved, that you were on a 24/7. You were always on call. And you'd be at a ball game with your kids, and you'd get a phone call from your boss's boss, and a question about what was going on over in a particular country, or whatever the issue was. You had to break off and answer it. So it's become very disruptive, I believe, and it's important to go back to the values. It's important to keep in mind just what you're there for and why you're doing it. And you're not there to make all your work peers happy. Really, you're there because you've got personal goals that you want to fulfill related to your family and so forth.
Yeah, Mark, I can very much relate to your comments about, as you get further along in your career, especially the bureaucracy, the stress, it becoming all consuming, just it's very relatable, and it certainly drives a lot of my priorities and values also. And I love your reference to Blackberries. I still remember when I first got a Blackberry at work. It was almost 20 years ago, and I was on the team rolling out Blackberries to the whole company. It was like such a new fancy technology that, we could start giving people Blackberries. And what it's even become in the last 20 years, and how, always on and tethered you are now with your phone to work.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting about your stories, and it is a good reminder for everybody that's working in high stress jobs, is that the demands placed on people by corporations and everyone's desire to both have less stress and do more meaningful things with their lives is not new. And Dad, it started with that book published decades ago, and you guys having similar discussions to what Maggie and I are dealing with right now. Every generation goes through something pretty similar, and whether it's Blackberries or iPads or the absence of technology, I think everybody can appreciate the need to simplify your life eventually, do things that are more meaningful with it. And so for people who are struggling with this right now, I think it's just a good reminder that this is not new, and people have been dealing with it and also finding ways to accomplish their goals for a long time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's become particularly intrusive, Mike, with the electronics and it never used to be. When I say never used to be, let's say 30 years ago, it wasn't a 24/7 thing because they really couldn't reach you. It's become a 24/7 now. The stress was always there, and you might take it home with you, but you weren't taking phone calls at 10 o'clock at night or on a Sunday or Saturday while you're trying to watch your kid play second base.
So I'm curious, how were you guys at the time, without getting into great detail, but just at a high level, how were you guys calculating what was kind of enough money to retire? Jack, particularly you, since you did retire so young.
Yeah. Well, this is another, I want to go back a bit to something that happened with Mark and I when we first met. I met him out at the shipyard, and the ships are all built with learning curves. They do it on log paper because you can then forecast what the ships are going to cost. And it works like a charm. And I was out there and kind of picked up an interest in log curves. I was always interested in math, and picked up an interest in log paper and then took it back, and that's why I did that S&P on log paper thing or whatever it was he saw. I don't even remember that now, but I started to do S&P stuff or log paper stuff, and I found it remarkable that if I took my net worth, and I was very meticulous about keeping track of my net worth regularly, where performance is measured, performance improves, and I started to plot it on log paper, and it didn't seem to matter what happened with my career or what I was doing in any particular job. If I kept working and I kept spending money the same way, my net worth increased by a predictable amount, and it was always on the log paper. And when Mark and I first started to talk seriously about it, I showed him this curve, and I said, geez, I know I got this from Quincy, but I'm doing this with my net worth. And we both just got hooked on this tool. And we just called it the curve, and we talked about our curves for 30 years. And of course, his curve went up like crazy because he was in terrific jobs and had a great growth career through 55. He's modest about the terrific jobs in Boeing and at McDonnell Douglas. My curve took a deep dive in 1992, and that was it. I no longer showed my curve around. I was still going up a little, but I wasn't going up a lot. But I found that was a great centering document for us for 15 years.
I found this is a curve. This is a 1995 curve. And for those obviously who aren't watching on Zoom, it's a plot of Jack's net worth and my net worth over a 15-year time period, which had both actuals and forecasts. And has got various regression lines on it. And so we would use that as a tool to try and determine just were we going to get there? So if you had a particular number in your head, can you in fact get there? And it's remarkable how if you just continue to save a ton of money, save a lot of money every year, and do it at a fairly consistent rate over some period of time, that you're going to get there, and you can see it graphically.
This feels like a early version of Microsoft Excel. This was pre-Excel, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What is log paper?
Logarithms are things that are allow you to add numbers because they're all the powers of 10. And so if you plot it on a piece of paper, it ends up being 9%. A straight line is 9% the first year and 9% the second year, and everything's and if you draw that on a regular paper, it's some sort of curve that you can't use to forecast it. The whole point was that if it's logarithmic growth, it's compounding. And if you knew you were going to have a $300,000 when you were 33 or something, and you could see the curve you were on, you could extend that curve and say, I'll be a millionaire by this date. And then you'd have a way of, you asked about how would you know how much you had. And that is exactly what that was. You could determine if I stayed in and worked full time until I was 55, I'm probably around here. If I dive out at 42, oops, it's bad, but it's still enough. You could have a reasonable way of projecting what the compounded growth in your net worth would be.
Yeah, my dad's always been pushing me to do this on log paper, and I keep telling him I don't understand what log paper is, and I have Excel, which works perfectly well. So why do you keep bugging me about this?
Well, you did. I was always surprised that you didn't dive right into it. I don't think math was your thing, but I gave you the log paper, and I said, if you just plot your net worth on this, it's going to be a straight line, and then it'll help you. I was sorry I didn't do a better job of explaining it.
That's the quote of the year, though, Mike, right there. Is your dad just saying, I don't think math was your
thing? It wasn't for a very long time. Up until business school, I didn't really like or appreciate math.
Wow, you've taken a 180 on that, because I think math is definitely your thing now. Yeah. So it's how you pay the bills, for sure.
I think, Jack, you'd admit that was one of your great failings in life, that you were not able to convince Michael to use log paper.
Well, that's true. But Jesse didn't do it either. I failed with both the kids.
Well, you know, it's never too late, guys. So Mike could turn himself around. He's a bit of a failure now, but perhaps, you know, in the next few years, we could get him on log paper. That'll be my new goal. I'll keep pushing it too.
Yeah.
It sounds like log paper is almost like graph paper, to be clear, though,
It
right?
is.
Okay, so they still make it. We can get you some.
I'll bring
We'll
you
do
some
an
log
old,
paper, and you'll be instantly turned off from it as I was.
Log paper it will have the first one will be the first degree multiple of 10, and the second one is the second degree, but it's half the size. And each time you go up, it's half the size. And that's why compounding is a straight line on it. But I'll send you some.
Yeah.
I'm
Get you out
excited.
of distribution.
I'm going to put the log paper with my book on cashing in on the American dream, how to retire at 35.
Now, I think that log paper is one of the options on Excel in chart making, and there's log paper on both axes or one axis. So you probably could take a set of numbers and put it on a piece of log paper electronically.
Dad, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I'm pretty sure we are not going to be using log paper.
Okay, well then I can guarantee you shouldn't trust your forecast of how much money you're going to have in 20 years.
Michael, I was personally disappointed, Michael, that it wasn't a chapter in your book.
Log paper.
I think I talked to him about it when I edited I gave him some ideas about his book. I think I talked about it.
Still don't understand.
You guys are hilarious. Let's I'm going to move us on from the log paper discussion, even though I'm the one that dove into it. So you guys clearly had a good understanding of your annual cost of living at that point also, which I think a lot of people don't, but I'm assuming that's something you guys knew and measured so that you could forecast.
We did. I'd say it's fair to say that we would do an annual budget. I don't think we were quite as enthusiastic about it as Michael is, but we knew what we were spending on, and it going back to your spouse, you know, she would both of us would sit down and go over it and make sure that we were spending to try and meet that budget. And over time, at least in my case, it becomes less important as you accumulate wealth, because it doesn't matter. You've got enough money to be able to do pretty much whatever you want to do. So you don't have to focus as diligently on it as you did as when we were, let's say, in our 30s and early 40s. Jack, would you say the same thing, that after a while you sort of drift away from it because you have accumulated wealth?
Well, not in my case. You had a lot more, but I had plenty. I had more than I was ever going to spend, and I know I couldn't spend it. I don't even have to make money on the money I have to spend to be 90, for instance. But what I found was that I just never liked spending money on something I just didn't think was worth it. And I think when I started, I was keeping a budget, but it was more just a total amount. I always treated saving money as a hobby. I loved finding a way to improve on taxes, or I loved making the Toyota Prius go another year, you know. But to me, trying to keep the same spending level at the same line was kind of a goal that I liked. And it's in some ways it gets a little easier as you get older. You have some expenses go up, and Medicare gets all the medical ones, but the other ones, they don't go up that much. You know, you're not doing as much entertainment, you're sitting around more. But I started keeping just track of annual expenses, and then had ideas next to them as to what I could do. And I think I had kind of an unusual experience after I left work, is that I really ended up spending the same amount of money for about 15 years in a row. And it went through the condo period. I didn't include the interest on the asset value, but it included the condo period was the same cost per year. And then when I sold the condo and started traveling, my costs were about the same, even though I was traveling around the world full time.
So, Dad, you touched on how your spending changed through some life changes, but maybe you both could talk a little bit about what your lives have looked like since you stopped working full time.
Jack, I'll let you lead this off.
Yeah.
You've led a more exciting life than I have.
Well, I had a nice run there until the pandemic. At any rate, when I retired at 42, and I think I did some consulting for GD. They were surprised I didn't go, and I was their expert on space systems division. So they hired me. They put me on a retainer and paid me a very nice hourly wage, and I did that for about a year and a half, off and on. And I did some work for a friend of Mark's and I's, Kay Ortiz, in a consulting company she had, and I think I probably worked about a third of a year each year average, and that I thought that was nice. I always liked working, but we basically started to travel with our kids when we could. We continued to do the summer traveling. Adrian and I, when the kids went away to college, we started to do some traveling on our own. We bought that condo and we stayed there for a while, and we traveled while we were there, but we lived in a really nice condo on the beach, and the kids came down and visited. In fact, in between undergraduate school and graduate school, they lived with us for a year, which we thought was one of the best years of our life when we all were living in a family on the beach. It was pretty cool. But they both went to college, graduate school. And after graduate school, they kind of settled down. They got married. And then they both moved away from Florida. And Adrian and I concluded that, well, why would we be here, And we decided that we just sell the condo and we'd put everything in storage. We gave away a lot of stuff and put everything in storage and start traveling around. And we went to Thailand for 100 days was our first trip. We came back and
that sounds amazing. Yeah. Jack, sorry to interrupt. How old were you at this point? Just ballpark.
This would have been 2013. So not that long ago.
So how old were you?
So I got to do the math. I don't know how old I'm 71 now, so I think it probably was about 63. But what surprised us is we kind of concluded we keep traveling as long as we liked it, and then eventually go live up somewhere near the kids. But we ended up really liking it, and we continued to travel for 7 years. And we'd visit the kids, but we didn't own a home or anything like that. And we still don't own a home, we're just we're in pandemic quarters, but we really kind of felt very lucky that we were able to do that. And one of the big lessons out of doing that for younger people is that if you got something you really want to do in your life, which is like travel, you don't delay too long. Stuff happens. You get injured, there's health problems, something happens to your parents, all of a sudden you're taking care of them. Your life isn't always your own, and sometimes it's better just to go for something that you think would be cool and just really push it. But that's what I did until I was on a cruise coming back up Mexico when the pandemic thing broke out, and I was lucky to get off the boat. We flew back to Asheville, and we've been sitting in a cottage here for 10 months, and it's actually pretty comfortable.
I love it. It's a very inspiring story, Jack, and I love your kind of push to your life isn't always your own, and taking some chances and doing what you think is right for you. So Mike is always telling me, this is why we wanted to get you on the show for so long, because he's always telling me just bits and pieces about your life, right? That you don't own a home, that you'll be passing through and coming for a visit. And I was always very fascinated by it, and because you guys are doing what we want to do. Okay, so let me
just make a comment that I am doing all this kind of on the interesting stuff and all this, but my backup plan to all this is if I ever run out of money, I'm going to stay real close to Mark, who's a good friend, and might move in with him or do something like that. He's my backup plan.
I like it. I thought you were going to say Mike, that you were going to move into Mike's basement.
No,
I think Mark has a nicer house.
Well, thanks for the warning.
He's got a couple houses. I figured I'd just go to the one he wasn't in.
I have to keep an eye on Mike, that this is going to be his backup plan someday. He's like, I'll go live with Maggie.
Yep, that's right. It's a great idea.
That's the true part of Friends on Fire. A real friend will be there for you when you need it. Okay, Mark. So tell us what you've been up to.
Well, I retired when I was 55, which was back in 2008. And I had mentioned earlier getting back to New England. Well, before we did that, of course, we had to sell the house, put everything in storage. we went and spent a winter with the O'Learys down in Cape Canaveral. And we rented a condo in the building next to theirs. And then we started traveling. We did some international travel. Jack and I and our wives, we took birding trips down into Texas along the Rio Grande River. We hooked up in Costa Rica. We hooked up in Germany at Michael's wedding. So we were able to get some travel in. And we eventually bought a place in a beautiful coastal town in Massachusetts called Newburyport, which is on the North Shore of Massachusetts. And we bought a condo there. I'd had pretty much enough of owning a house with spending weekends doing leaves and all that kind of stuff. So in the meantime, we're traveling, we're spending time with our mothers, who at this point, both of us became pretty much primary caregivers. We've always been fans of Maine, and we vacationed up there for like 30 years. And we always had sort of a dream of having a place up there, but so we're up there one day and we see this place that's for sale, and it's a dumpy little cottage, but it was up in Kennebunkport, Maine. And I looked at Linda and I said, geez, I don't really feel like having a second home. I mean, I need a second house like a hole in the head. But she convinced me that it was really asset diversification. That it really wasn't spending money. It was just shifting assets around.
I love it.
And as usual, she was right. And so anyway, we bought this piece of land up there. It's a couple of houses away from the beach up in Kennebunkport, and we built a house up there. It started out as one of these little tiny, conceptually anyway, as one of these little tiny things in my mind that would be a little cottage that we could be electric heat, and you'd shut it off and walk away for the winter. And when we were working with an architect, every time I'd say, well, we want to have a 3-bedroom. And Linda would say, no, I'm not going to have my kids sleeping on the floor. I said, okay. So that goes to, now all of a sudden we're in a 4-bedroom place, and it just grew and grew. And we ended up with this really lovely house up there anyway. But so we're now down, we sold Newburyport, we're now down in Maryland. We have 2 children in Maryland, one in St. Louis. They all have children. I shouldn't say children. Each of them has a grandchild, and there's 2 more on the way. So it becomes, you reach the point where grandchildren, once the grandkids come around, the ball game's over. And you spend a lot of time focused on them and making sure that you're a part of their lives. And we're fortunate that we've been able to afford to do that, I guess you could say, when we're not all living in the same town. We're in different states. We're up in New England, they're in Maryland and St. Louis, so it takes a fair amount of travel to keep up with that. So you don't have to. So I would say at this point we're doing, of course, the pandemic put everything into a holding pattern, but I would say right now things pretty much sort of revolve around the family and the kids and the grandkids.
Nice. So did you say you're living in Maryland or in Kennebunkport now?
Both.
Okay. I've heard of Kennebunkport, but I'm not super familiar with it. And I Googled it while you were talking. It is beautiful. I've never actually been to Maine, but it's on my list of places I'd like to go.
Oh, yeah, it's a spectacular place.
It is. We visited them up there. It's a great place. Mark, you need to include another story in here, I think, please. That when one of the things that stood out about me and your family from the day I met you was that you spent every summer up there. And you went to the funny little cottage that you didn't buy because you just didn't want to buy an old cottage, I think, but you bought the land. But I think, didn't you go up there like 15 years in a row as every summer thing for you? And it was a mecca of every one of your kids, and they all go and they never miss. You're always up there in July, right?
Yeah, we've been going up there for over 30 years. And what got us up there was my brother has a place literally right across the street from the piece of land that we bought. And we'd go up and sleep on his floor. We'd be on a sofa and we'd just throw the kids on the floor and everybody spends the day at the beach. It was great fun. So really our kids grew up there and they can't wait to get up there in the summer. And we do everything for them. So it's our goal is to make their vacation, because they're now the ones that are in the saddle and under the stress. And so our goal is to make it as comfortable and as easy for them, and to make sure that they have a comfortable house to come to, and we feed them properly, and lobster dinners and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, my brother, he's there right across the street, and my other brothers come in. So it's a bit of a zoo when all the Sullivans are running around, but great fun.
Beachcombers on fire. How about that?
I love it. And also, Mark, I forgot to mention, I love that your first stop after you retired was to go spend a winter with the O'Learys. That's true Friends on Fire there. So that's why you guys are the OGs.
Good.
Mike and I have a secret plan that when we both retire, we're going to like spend a summer in Bali with our families, so we've got a similar thing.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice place to go.
It's a loose plan. There's not a lot of details to it. And I don't think we've even told our partners about it, but they'll be excited to go to Bali.
They'll be on board. Don't worry. So to wrap up these very interesting stories about your lives, I think it'd be interesting for us, and I think for the listeners, to hear about any regrets you might have had, specifically about the financial path your lives have taken, and if you would have done anything differently.
I think I certainly got a lot of things I do different in my youthful life. I assume everybody does. I don't think I do have a lot of things that I do differently. I think part of it was that the kind of the value-based thinking really eliminates a lot of remorse. Even if you have to make a very difficult decision between this value and that value, knowing that you made the appropriate one for who you are really gives you the ability to put problem behind you. I don't regret making decisions that I should probably think of something I did do like this, but like leaving work. I mean, it was a stupid thing to do by most people's standards, but at least as young as I was. But for me, it was what I wanted to do.
I think it's amazing that you say you have, limited and really can't think of any regrets. And I also would say, I know when you were probably half joking when you say, it's a stupid thing to do, but you see now, I know that's why we kind of joke that you guys are the OGs here. You see now the movement that is happening of people recognizing that there's things more important in life and not wanting to, just kind of have this all encompassing, relationship with their work and knowing that there's better paths out there. And so I would argue like you are a trendsetter in, the path that you've chosen to take in life. And I think it's great to hear that you have no regrets, because I think that's what you want, right? To look back and think like, I'm proud of what I've done and the path I've taken in life.
Well, I think you'd have regrets about a decision that you made wrong, And if you really study yourself, if you know what your soul's like, you'll know what the right decisions are to make. There's another thing that I think it kind of comes to light to this. Mark and I were talking about this yesterday. We were doing a Friends on Fire call yesterday and we were thinking about retirement and old age, and that it looks great on paper that the retirement age or the death age went from like 72 to 89, And we were pointing out, but it's a pretty tough 80s, The 80s aren't exactly what you think they would be, And we're starting to we talk about things that happen to us both and to our spouses now that are kind of worrisome things, but things you can handle. But you got to be prepared for a lot of change. I think the idea is that there's a certain amount of urgency that creeps in when you turn about 55, where you say, boy, I better make smart decisions here. I want to make the best decisions I can and use the the resources that I have to go out, do things that interest me, and live the way I want to.
Okay, Mark, you're up.
Regrets are really difficult because you don't know what the alternative future would have been. So it would have been nice to have been able to have the career that I did have by not leaving New England, by moving to St. Louis. But as it turns out, I mentioned earlier, we love St. Louis, and it turned out to be a great move for us. The kids grew up really well. Linda did a great job with the kids. I was lucky in that I found the right life partner, and I say that in the context of you have to make sure that you're doing the right strategic things in life. There are all kinds of tactical things boy, if I had only been in the stock market in the year 2000 and, that type of thing. But those are all tactical sort of business decisions, and they're not strategic. As long as you're making the right strategic decisions and the right choices regarding the really important things in life, then your regrets are going to be they're in the noise, really, because they're really small tactical things that have very little to do with life and how you ultimately turn out, regardless of what type of curve you have and how much money you have or whatever. Even that is not, money is nice, everybody's got to have it, but that's not the important. I know this is a show about money, but the important thing is your family and making sure that your kids are being raised properly and being educated properly, and you're maintaining your health and all the rest, presuming you have the right values, again, to use that term. All the rest will fall into place.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you guys say that. I was a little worried that you were going to say early retiring was a terrible idea.
No.
You guys should give up this podcast and just keep working.
No, I'm not the least bit worried about the two of you. I've listened to all of your podcasts.
Oh, thank you.
And I think it's really great. You guys have done a great job. And it's
Thanks, Mark.
I'm not the least bit surprised that you've had over 35,000 downloads. So you're both to be congratulated. I think it's a great service that you're providing, but it's great entertainment, and it's very informative, and it's important. It's an important subject. So it's my congratulations to the two of you. You've done a nice job.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. That means a lot.
I'm glad to hear Michael talk about being afraid we were going to tell you not to retire. I think everybody ought to consider it, but I think the problem that I've seen with people who retire either early or even at 62 or something, isn't that early, is that they really aren't prepared for what they're going to do next. And if you don't start to author a life plan, or have interests that are important to you, or you have families that you want to actually move closer to, if you don't have something that's going to make that experience great, then you're really not prepared to retire. You better not, because you're going to get there and you're going to feel, well, what do I do now? The time to know what you're going to do in retirement is long before you retire.
I think that's a great point. We really appreciate you guys coming on. I love that you invited yourself on, but I've literally been asking. I didn't know about you, Mark, or I would have been asking for you too, but I've been asking to get Jack on all year. And Mike's been keeping him hidden away in his quarantine spot all year. But we really appreciate you guys coming on. I think the path and the decisions that you guys have made, again, based on your values, as we talked about, are applaudable, right? You guys should be super proud. I hope you kind of sit back and reflect on your life and are very proud of the legacy you've created and the paths you've taken. But I think it's also so inspiring to future generations, which is, yeah, clearly it was inspiring to Mike. And, it's one of the things that we are trying to do with this show is you made a comment, Mark, that this is a podcast about money. But I think it's a podcast about, lifestyle and values and the choices you make in life. And, one of the things we're trying to do is inspire people to be happy and choose the right paths in life that will make them happy. And we don't believe that it's spending a lot of money and living beyond your means and all of that. And so I just really appreciate you guys coming on, because I do think your stories and paths are very inspiring to others. And to see that you were doing it, 50 years ago is pretty cool.
Well, I don't think it was 50. Did you say 50?
I said 50, but I was like, oh no, that was really young. So yeah, 20, 30 years ago was cool.
Yeah.
I don't know when the log paper started, whatever year that was.
How long? It's been like 35 plus years, right, Mark?
Oh, yeah.
Something like that.
Well, thank you guys. This has been a pleasure.
Really enjoyed it.
We're excited that this is our first episode of 2021.
Cool.
And we hope you guys have a happy new year.
Happy New Year to you both as well.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Maggie.
Bye.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks everybody for listening. If you've been challenged or inspired by what you've heard today, please rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. If you have thoughts or questions, we'd love to hear from you, and you can leave us a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370 or hit us up on Instagram or Facebook, and we'll have all those links in the show notes.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Maggie.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Bye.
Bye.